Are you the best? Hello noble ones and welcome to Metatron's Academy, the channel where we explore how to learn languages the most fun and effective way possible. So, language learning is a journey, and during this journey you will come across and encounter all sorts of, we could say, stumbling blocks that will slow down your progress in whatever language that you're trying to achieve fluency in, whether you are trying to be just an enthusiast, a translator, a professional interpreter, a linguist, a polyglot, what have you. Now, identify these possible obstacles early on in your linguistic journey is crucial, categorically imperative. And even though some of these obstacles are quite obvious, for example, laziness. If you're lazy, it will slow down your progress and perhaps even make you quit a language. So that one is quite an obvious one, but others might be a little more subtle. Another quite obvious problem that you might come across and encounter during your linguistic journey is the financial one, in the sense that learning a language can be expensive, particularly if you want to buy all sorts of study materials, monthly magazines or courses, you want to participate and enter classes, you want to travel, go to other countries. All of this can have a significant price. But even though this is a problem that often people find, luckily there may be solutions. The two most obvious ones being either you start making more money or you find ways that are cheap or even completely inexpensive, like literally zero cost, to access learning material. For example, subscribing to the Academy. Why don't you do it right now? However, the one almost invisible stumbling block that a lot of people, maybe you as well, often have to deal with is the one called overconfidence. So let's address it. This might sound strange because whenever you try and learn a language, well, you need to be confident because you need to go out there, expose yourself to the world, interact with natives as much as possible, and it is a documented fact with a statistical evident significance that outward people, outgoing people, extroverted individuals tend to do better when it comes to languages and their progress than introverted people or people who are very shy. With that being said, you can have too much of a good thing. So let me expand on that. Let's talk about you for a moment. Let's say that you enjoy languages, you've been studying languages for a very long time, you have had a certain degree of success. Oftentimes when you join a classroom with other students, everyone tries to pronounce, but you kind of sound the best. People praise you whenever you try and repeat something and you're like, so is this how you pronounce it? And then you say it and people are like, yeah, I was very good actually. And so all of that feeds your linguistic ego. Now, don't get me wrong, feelings of reward coming from successes are fantastic. And most likely, if this is you that I've just described, you just might be better than average. However, when this happens a lot, what can happen and what will happen most likely is that if you don't keep a very open mind and you don't try to keep a humble mind when it comes to your successes, you might run into what is called a Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect, which I have just mispronounced, is a cognitive bias, whereby people who don't have a very high skill or expertise in whatever ability they are trying to learn, say for example a new language that you have just started learning, tend to overestimate their ability, knowledge or skill level. And differently from how some people tend to use this effect, it doesn't just have to do with unintelligent people, it absolutely happens to people of high IQ as well. Now, to that you also need to add possible personality traits, but in general, if what I'm about to tell you tends to happen to you as well as the other things I just said a minute ago, you might be having this obstacle in front of you. Check this out. Let's say that you are in a classroom during a language lesson, and normally the way these things go, as I was saying, everyone reads a sentence or is asked to do a task from the teacher. Well, when you do it, you just do it better than everyone else. And yet the teacher is asking all of you to pronounce a difficult word. So the teacher says it. Let's pretend it's a word in Japanese for a moment. The word Yokohama. So everyone starts repeating it, you also say it, and then another one of your classmates says it, and the teacher reacts to what your classmate says and says, yeah, exactly, like she said. That puzzles you because, you're good at languages, you just said it the exact same way, so why did she get praised and not you? So you ask the teacher, you're like, so you meant Yokohama? And she goes, no, Yokohama. And you're like, that's what I just said. In your head, I hope, because otherwise it would be rather rude. Then once again, that classmate of yours repeats it, Yokohama. To your ear, it sounds just the same, but the teacher once again praises her and says, yeah, exactly like that. And that blows your mind. You're like, no way. How is that possible? I said it the same way. How can she say it better than me? If this is your reaction, then absolutely you are in front of that obstacle and you need to break free, my friend. So what's happening in this scenario, to give you also a little bit of context on what I was doing in Japanese there, is that oftentimes what happens with people who don't have a very high level of training in Japanese, and I'm talking several years, what can happen is that they hear a sound like Yokohama, I'll say it very slowly, Yokohama, and because their mind, and because they're not trained, they're trying to repeat the language, the sound that they're hearing, and they're focusing on the yo, the vowel, how short they are, how long they are, the aspirated H, ha, the overall intonation. And so when they mimic that, and in their mind they did it the same way, they're not noticing that what the teacher, being a native Japanese, was actually meaning was the pitch. Now, pitch accent is a massive topic. Does it matter? Should you care about it? Is it okay if you don't study it? I'm not going to dive into that, but I will make a dedicated video soon, as that's a massive rabbit hole. With that being said, Japanese, even if they don't teach it, oftentimes they don't even know how to teach it when they're Japanese natives, but they do care about it. In the sense that if they say something and they do use the pitch accent, I'll give you in a second an example of what that is, and then you don't repeat it because you don't even know what you're supposed to repeat when it comes to pitches, but someone else does because, I don't know, they just have a better ear, and that can happen. Then the teachers will say, oh yeah, she said it right, but you don't even know why, and in your ear, you said it the same way, but you didn't, and you just didn't have the skill level to realize that. In this case, what we would be focusing in the word Yokohama would be what note in a keyboard we are actually touching, in the sense that yo is low, ko is high, so Yokohama, and then the rest, ha, ma, stay high. It's also acceptable for ma to go low, so you can say Yokohama or Yokohama. They're both acceptable. I tend to just keep it high. Yokohama. So if you do everything else correctly, but you say Yokohama, Yoko, then already yo is high and ko is low, and so you're not saying it exactly like she is, but you might not even realize it. It's a similar situation with the word for God, which is kami, high-low, and the word for hair, which is kami, which is low-high. Japanese has a lot of these. But going back to the overconfidence problem, if you are above average, which you probably are, you might have the tendency or the illusion to think that you're actually the best. And even though the likelihood of you being just really good is pretty high, percentage-wise, the likelihood of you being the actual best, well, now the numbers are dropping. And that's the same for me. I know that I'm not the best. For example, when it comes to Japanese, someone like Matt versus Japan, I think is a better speaker than me. I have no problem saying that. I think I'm pretty good at Japanese, so I'm not trying to be like fake humble. I'm good at Japanese, but I'm not as good as Matt versus Japan. I know there are speakers out there that have a much better English than mine. I still think my English is pretty good, but it's not perfect, and so on. I could say this with every single language, like Mandarin, and so forth. Still, being pretty good, you might face this problem that you think you're the best, and then because you think you're the best, the reason why this becomes a stumbling block, if you don't realize that there's a little Dunning-Kruger effect there, probably. If you don't realize that, if you don't recognize that, it will block your progress because you really think you know everything. And in that little scenario that I gave you earlier on, if you are not willing to accept that that other student, she just said it better than you, and there is nothing wrong with that. It's not a loss. Particularly if she has been studying Japanese for a while and you haven't, then why were you expecting to be just automatically better anyways? Maybe sometimes it happens, but it can also happen that you run into someone who's just better than you, better than me, and there is nothing wrong with it. Particularly if they've been studying that specific aspect of the language, namely pronunciation and pitch accent in this case, longer than you have. So once you realize that and you open your mind to the possibility that, yeah, I'm pretty good, but I'm not the best, when a correction comes, when someone does a better job than you do, you can use that opportunity now because you recognize it and you accept it as an opportunity to learn. You do this for a year and you will be a completely different linguist and you will be better than how you are now. Which is also one of the reasons why it's usually better to just compare yourself with your previous self rather than trying to compete with other people when it comes to your personal progress. Competing is also important. I'm not saying that competition is not there, because the entirety of society is competitive, and therefore you do need to get accustomed to competing, but that's usually during tests. It's during exams. That's when you compete. During an interview for a job, that's when you compete. You don't have to compete every single time, all the time, and always be the winner. So let's say for a moment instead that you didn't recognize that you might being a little overconfident there, that there is this stumbling block, this obstacle in front of you, and you just fixate, no, the teacher is wrong. You start going to denial. Now that student, yeah, I don't think she pronounced it better than me. I think we are the same, or maybe I think I said it better. And the teacher, she's just stupid. She doesn't realize, she doesn't know what I can do. And so if you go into that, apart from the fact that it, then you step into arrogance. If you think it, at least people don't know it. You block yourself, you prevent yourself from learning, but hey, it is what it is. But then if you start saying that, then it's going to be even worse, because it's going to be a problem to be a friend of yours. And then again, because if you're very arrogant and overconfident, that usually doesn't help. And so to wrap up this section and move into the next one, which still has to do with the Japanese, but not the language, the overall aspect of how they interact socially, and there is something we can all learn from them. But before I jump into that one, which will be the conclusion of this video, to just wrap up this point, if you don't learn to accept corrections, to accept that you might not be the best, you miss out incredible opportunities. Because if he was okay with that and he was like, yeah, okay, I'll look into this. So you go to the teacher with an open heart, an open mind, and you say, so what is it that she said better than me? It's great that she did, but what is it? What did I say wrong? And maybe the teacher will be able to tell you if she's professional, and she'll be able to tell you, oh, it's a matter of pitches. So you want to say yo is low, ko is high, and maybe that's a complete new world for you. And then you get into it, and then you start researching it. And as I say, after a year, because you accepted that in that specific moment in time, you weren't the best, and maybe after a year you will be the best in that classroom, but you couldn't become the best if you hadn't recognized first that someone performed better than you. And that concludes this section. For the next section, let's talk about the Japanese. So the Japanese sometimes socially can be awkward, and I've lived in Japan for 4 years, and I can't say that everything is wonderful and perfect as some people think after they spend like a week as tourists in Japan. Honestly, they don't know what they're talking about. But there is one thing that I really like about Japan, and that is their sense of humility, which is strongly connected within their language at a linguistic and even syntactic level. What I mean by that is that the Japanese have a tendency, whenever you praise them, to refute that praise, even if they know that they are correctly receiving praise for something they did, which was outstanding. So, for example, if I am in England and someone praises my English and they say, oh, you speak English very well, I'll say, well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you. If I were anywhere else in Italy and someone asked me about how well can you speak Japanese, I'll tell them, oh, yeah, I'm pretty fluent in Japanese. Not perfect, but yeah, I'm pretty confident with my Japanese. I can walk around Japan, no problem. I can understand the Japanese even if they speak fast. Pretty good with technical. So I actually give them the answer. But if that happens in Japan, my mind shifts because it needs to. Because you need to adapt to the receiving culture. So when you go to Japan, if I go to Japan and someone tells me, Nihongo jouzu, and I know there is a whole meme about this, so let's use another one. Nihongo ryūchō desu ne. If they do anything that is in Nihongo jouzu and they actually mean it. So I'm not saying when you just say, arigato, and they go, Nihongo jouzu. I'm not talking about that one. That one is that's a meme by now. But let's say that you had an extended conversation with Japanese, like it happened, of course, while I was living there, and someone actually means it. They're like, Nihongo, sugoi desu ne, Nihonjin mitai, Nihonjin rashi. Like if they say that and they mean it, my answer is always to deny, because that's what they do. So even if you know that you are good, you don't say, arigatou gozaimasu. That's weird in Japan. You just, in fact, if you do that, you're just kind of proving them wrong in the sense that, well, your answer is not very Japanese, so maybe you don't know all of that Japanese really, at least when it comes to the culture. Instead, when they praise your Japanese, if you say, iie, mada desu, heta desu, or whatever other way, even if you want to go intricate about it, you want to say, mada korekara no ganbari ni kakatte kimasu ne. Whatever way you use to kind of deflect or completely reject the praise, well, that's what they do as default in Japan. And I think that that's fantastic. Let me tell you why. Because not only kind of shows humility, given maybe they don't always mean it, but even if you don't mean it, it's still good to show humility, because if you show overconfidence and someone tells you, あ、日本語上手ですね。And you say, はい、私の日本語は上手です。私はすっごいですね。日本語は本当に私は、日本人っぽいですね。Like if you say, I'm so good, I'm perfect, my Japanese, I never make mistakes, and then you make a mistake, you will sound and look like a fool. And that's gonna feel really awkward after all the praise, and it's gonna make it harder for you because now if you say that your Japanese is kanpeki, it's like perfect, it's excellent, or even with my English I would feel weird about that. If you say your language skill is incredible, it's excellent, and maybe it is, but then you will be held to a much higher standard, so the moment you slip, the moment you mispronounce one letter, they'll be like, it wasn't perfect, and then you'll feel like it's not fair because you're like, wait, I spoke for like 20 minutes, I only fucked up one word, but what about all the other words that I got right? But then it won't matter because you just said it was excellent, and so everything is going to stand out like literal black ink on a white piece of paper. On the other hand, and this is where Japanese wisdom comes into, if you denied it, even if you were good, if you said, no, my Japanese, I'm still working on it, it's, I like it a lot, I study a lot, but I still have a long way to go. If you find humble ways to downplay all the praises that you're receiving, then if you make a mistake, well, you did say that you're still studying, and so people will in fact forget the mistakes because you'll sound nice. So even if you make a mistake and you say, let me think, maybe you're using an adjective and you want to say sugoi yo, sugoi desu yo, and then you make a mistake of saying sugoi da yo, which you cannot attach the da particle to a e adjective. You need to, if you want to, you can put an n, sugoin da yo, but you cannot do sugoi da yo. It just doesn't work. You make that mistake, it's going to be fine because then they're going to be like, oh no, you're doing great, you're fantastic, because they like you. On the other hand, if you do not make a mistake and you do speak incredibly well, then the fact that you sort of played it down, it's going to make you sound even better, and people are going to be like, wow, he just said it was horrible and now he's speaking like this, and then they are going to lift you up. So my suggestion is, overconfidence can be a problem for the reasons that we have explained earlier on in the video, but also learning to be humble when it comes to your own skill level, even if you know you're good. It's the best thing you can do because otherwise overconfidence can backfire. Alright, number ones, well, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up, and if you're not yet members of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel, Metatrons Academy, for more videos. And thank you very much for watching and joining Metatrons Academy.